and welcome to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iProperty Radio, or indeed email the show at hello@ipropertyradio.com. Your host for today is myself, Carol Tallon, and I'm delighted to be joined by Marie Hunt, Head of Research at CBRE. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a busy week for your firm.
Absolutely, it has. I suppose we bring out a new report on the 1st of every second month. So it being the 1st of March, we've a new report out. So thankfully, I can report that all sectors of the market seem to be performing quite well at the moment. So despite the fact that we're in lockdown, it's busy out there.
You know, that's such an interesting one. And in terms of the report, there's actually lots in that, so we will get to it. But before we start with that, I mentioned that I heard you give a presentation over the past week about trends in the office market. And I think it's really interesting because there's such a heightened debate going on and offline about the future of the office, the future of work. So maybe you could give us an overview of how things stand based on your own research.
First thing I'd say is our view of the future of the office is probably radically different this March than it would have been last March. So when we went into lockdown first and we began to see that it was possible to be productive and work effectively from home, there was kind of a message out there that, you know, the future of the office was doomed and that we would forever work remotely. And I think now that we've had 12 months of it, I think most people are quite anxious to get back into an office environment. And I think we're beginning to realise that the answer is probably somewhere a blend between the two. So people who traditionally would have worked full-time in an office will probably take 1 or maybe 2 days working from home going forward. But I think absolutely COVID has shaped the market, but has accelerated trends that were probably happening anyway. But definitely we've had a full year of an experiment, and I think it really has changed people's minds as to what the future of the office will be.
Yeah, you know, I think it's really interesting when you talk about the changes that have happened, because actually today is the first day where my adult daughter is not working for me and is working for another company. And now suddenly we've realized that actually working in different jobs. So now I understand two adults working on different jobs is very difficult in the office. So straight away, like, this is only day one. And by lunchtime, we had run into issues like broadband when we're both on video calls, also soundproofing, because we're very fortunate to have quite a large home office, which is, you know, would happily accommodate 4, as long as 4 people aren't on video calls. And actually what we discovered is that it doesn't support 2 on video calls. So we've been Googling like crazy acoustic room dividers, you know. So these are the things that I didn't even find challenging over the past 12 years or over the past 12 months. And now this morning, it's a problem. So,
and I think it's been a particular challenge for people who've had young kids at home. I know some of them have gone back to school now, but at home trying to do homeschooling and everybody's using internet, like, it's not ideal scenario. But at the same time, I think there's an awful lot of people who would have appreciated the opportunity to work from home part of the time, and it just wasn't tolerated by their employers until now. And now this experiment has shown that it actually is possible. So I think that there's a whole cohort of people out there, particularly women, that will now be able to work that maybe traditionally would have had to give up their jobs because remote working just wasn't an option. So it hasn't been all bad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, you know, again, I personally would have found it quite easy because I don't have young children. You know, when I think about people homeschooling, and I maybe didn't have as deep an appreciation of people where there was 2 parents working and trying to homeschool. You know, again, these are all challenges. And I think one of the things we've discovered is that our homes aren't designed to be all engaged in separate activities in the same place. Our homes are designed for us to be involved in kind of shared activities at the same time, because that's generally what happens after work and school. You know, so there's so much needs to be redesigned. I thought you brought up a really important point. You know, working remotely and working from home was mistakenly kind of used interchangeably. And actually what we've come to realize is they're really very different terms. So, you spoke about, that it's not just a case of working from the office or working from home, that there's working from this third place. So you might just expand on that a little.
I suppose when we talk about the third place, you're probably talking about flexible office accommodation. So over the last couple of years, we've begun to see operators coming into the market. I think the one that everybody knows is WeWork, and there was kind of a question mark as to how these operators are going to fit into the traditional Dublin office market. But in actual fact, there's huge demand now for flexibility. And I think in some cases, people, their homes may not be set up for remote working, but they don't want to all have to traipse into the central part of the city every single day. So I think you will begin to see hubs starting to emerge. Now, they'll be in satellite locations. In some parts of Ireland, you could see remote working hubs in parts of the country. And that was certainly in the government strategy on remote working that came out in recent weeks. So rather than commute to the capital 5 days a week, you might commute to the local hub. But also, I suppose, third place would encompass things like the local coffee shop. If you want to go and use their broadband for a while and have your coffee, you don't necessarily have to be in a particular place between the hours of 9 and 5. The whole ethos of working is changing. And again, this is something that was probably happening anyway, but COVID has just accelerated that trend.
There definitely are advantages and disadvantages to that, because actually I'm somebody who was such a fan of getting out of the office, getting into coffee shops. Just life energizes you. It gives you new ideas. As you're sitting there waiting for an appointment, you're watching the world go by, and it's sparking new ideas because you're seeing things that you wouldn't be seeing otherwise. And it's definitely something that I've struggled with myself, these back-to-back Zoom calls. Productivity has shot through the roof. And in fact, only this morning we were onboarding new team members, which is so difficult, much more difficult, I think, for the people who are starting new roles than for ourselves as a company. So one of the things that I'm just so aware of is that, people are starting roles, trying to connect online. It can be really very challenging to try get the full experience and the culture. And one of the things that I found myself, and I think maybe I hadn't admitted it out loud to myself, but actually I found as we were describing kind of the work process over 2020, we've had a huge jump in productivity. Our productivity as a company has actually never been higher. The creativity, it's just not on par. It hasn't jumped in the same rate. How is that going to feed into decisions? People are required for creativity, and how is that going to be catered?
I would think there's probably more C's than just creativity. I think collaboration absolutely has to happen in an office environment. And I think where you really see is young people who are starting out, particularly those that have started in the last 12 months and haven't physically met any of their colleagues. Like, that must be extremely difficult. But if you think of particularly younger people coming through an organization, they learn by watching and seeing what's happening. And that just can't happen at home. So absolutely, I think that's where we're going to see most pressure in terms of getting people back physically into an office. But creativity, you're dead right. Collaboration, all of these things happen organically when you're in an office environment, and it's much more forced when you're remote. So am I saying you all have to be back in the office Monday to Friday? Absolutely no way. But I think the best optimum is somewhere between the two. And that for particular elements of your role, you will be in the office physically, and in other parts, depending on what your job is, you can do that just as well from home.
Yeah, as leaders in this space, CBRE in Ireland are very well placed to see the trends a good while before they're reported on. So from speaking to your clients and from them indeed speaking to their team members and employees, what kind of sense are you getting in terms of how changes, what will the workplace and the office look like, in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, well, I think being part of a global organisation like CBRE, we've had great insight from our colleagues all over the globe, and in particular those in Asia who are a little bit ahead of us in this curve. And I suppose what they're telling us is they're back to the office pretty much full time now, but it's a very different office than what they left. So any of the buildings that are more modern and can allow for greater flexibility, they've moved the furniture around, they've got a lot more space for collaboration. Probably less desk space than what they had previously, because certainly everybody's spread out that little bit more. And they do have some colleagues working from home more remotely than that they would have previously. So what you end up with is almost like a net position where you still have the same amount of space, but you've less people physically in the office at any point in time. So everybody's more distanced. And even those that have had vaccinations, they're still reluctant to go back to a hot desking type model. They're much more comfortable having assigned seating. I think one of the things we've said from the very outset is it's too early for any organisation to decide now how much office space they're going to need going forward. I think until such time as everybody's back and you can do surveys with staff and get feedback from them as to who wants to work from home, how many days a week, and is that feasible? That can only be done when everybody's back. And I think, again, there's no one size fits all because it's going to differ from one organisation to another. So if you look at, for example, a law firm, they may not want everybody out on an open floor. They may still want more individual offices. For a company like CBRE, where a lot of our brokers are out and about and travelling at any point in time, we don't need a physical desk for every single one of them every day of the week. But these are decisions that can't be made, I think, until everybody's back in the office first. And then there's a lot of work that has to be done at that point, figuring out how much space is needed.
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair point. And it's not just about, I suppose, the company figuring out, as you said, it's about actually surveying people as to how they feel and what's going to work, because I think there has been a shift in priorities. I suppose another big thing this week, the real estate market outlook for 2021 report issued. And it was a bit of a mixed bag, but I think there was maybe some surprise highlights in there, particularly around industrial. So you might just give us an overview on that.
I suppose industrial is a sector that investors the world over have been kind of piling into over the last 2 to 3 years. And that certainly was something we were seeing in Ireland too. So both from an occupier and an investor viewpoint. But I think Brexit has really accelerated that in Ireland's terms. So what you've seen is, if you think of a lot of the big retailers, none of their goods would have been stored in country. They would have been bringing everything through a port or an airport. And over the last 2 to 3 years, they've been shifting some of their requirements in country so that they have a certain amount of stock held in country. And if you think back to the shortages that were in the stores this time last year when we went into lockdown first, the whole expectation is to have more stock and inventory held in country going forward to avoid those sort of scenarios. And now, since the 1st of January, you have delays and extra costs and tariffs. So as a result, that's kind of accelerated that trend. So you have a lot of companies wanting to set up operations, and that's putting huge pressure then on the demand for sheds, as we used to call them, but industrial logistics facilities. On top of that, you would have some of the UK retailers that would have closed down their Irish physical stores, but still have a huge Irish audience that want to buy their goods. So they're looking at setting up distribution channels to facilitate online delivery. So they may not have a physical store in Ireland anymore, but you can still buy their goods online. And then last year, the biggest pure play online retailer set up an operation here. And the expectation is that more will start to follow suit there. So it's a sector where there's very limited stock. There's plenty of older 1970s and 1980s sheds around the place, but they probably have a higher value use at this point. But in terms of the brand new logistics facilities that occupiers actually want, there's plenty in planning, but there's actually very few under construction. And all of them, unfortunately, at this point in time are in lockdown because of the construction sites being on hold. So there's huge pent-up pressure in that particular sector.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one. Because of COVID, and the ongoing restrictions, that's really dominating all of our conversations, and, particularly around the ongoing delays to construction. But Brexit obviously is probably, would it be fair to say that Brexit is playing as big, if not an even larger role in the demand for logistics here in Ireland?
I think a bit like I've said on a few occasions now, it's accelerating what was happening anyway. So we were beginning to see a lot of the distribution moving in country anyway. We're beginning to see a lot of different types of operators like data center operators, and what their needs are so specific. So this demand was building anyway. And I think Brexit has just added another layer of activity to that. And then COVID again, because we were all ordering so much online over the last 12 months, that has fueled that activity as well. So definitely this is a beneficiary of Brexit. And I suppose to some degree, going back to the office market, it also has seen a pickup in activity because of Brexit. Now, it hasn't seen a huge dividend in terms of jobs created, but it certainly has seen a lot of new companies setting up an Irish office and opening maybe a small Dublin office, but the hope would be in time that some of these organisations will grow their footprint here. So both of those sectors have benefited on the back of Brexit.
Okay, and it feels quite early to be asking this conversation, particularly while we're still in level 5 lockdown. But I mean, what are the market expectations for 2021? And I suppose coupled with the market expectations, you might just give us some insight into the ongoing investor sentiment, because we know that has been robust up to now, but how sustainable is that?
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of frustration because the expectation in January was that the market would kickstart quicker. We knew that there was a wall of capital there. There's investor demand for all sorts of assets, particularly on the multifamily side. But what we have seen is that that's now been delayed because of the additional lockdown, because particularly with the bigger transactions, you're not going to get an investor or indeed their funders to finalise a deal until such time as somebody's actually physically seen the asset. So the fact that you can't arrive here and travel and do inspections is putting a bit of a halt on things. But what we have seen is that the market has adapted so well over the last 12 months. There's a certain amount of activity that can happen regardless. And if we look at the multifamily sector, you can actually do those deals without necessarily having to travel, because you're forward committing to a project that's still a drawing on a map. So those deals can actually happen. So we have seen plenty of activity. The expectation is for a much stronger second half to the year, when hopefully travel restrictions are lifted. But the momentum is building, and there's a lot of campaigns that are being prepped for sale. Maybe the launch dates are being pushed out a little bit now until we're out of lockdown, but certainly the expectation is for a much stronger second half to the year. And I think for that reason, within our report this week, what we've said is, if you are an occupier that's in the office market, looking to lease space, or if you are a retailer looking for, now is a perfect time to be doing that, because you're going to get deals now that probably won't be there later in the year. But in terms of investor appetite, it is as strong as it was. And I think a key thing to say is this downturn that we've gone through over the last 12 to 18 months is nothing like what we went through last time. So you're not seeing the stress. The investors that are there, the pricing is holding up relatively well. Retail has obviously softened, but again, that's a trend that was happening anyway before COVID. But investor appetite is still really, really strong, and particularly on the housing side and around multifamily in particular.
Okay, it's great to be able to end an interview on a positive note. That isn't always the case. But again, for anybody who wants to take an in-depth look at that report, the Real Estate Market Outlook report for 2021, it's available on CBRE.ie. That was Marie Hunt, Head of Research at CBRE. We need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iProperty Radio, or email hello@ipropertyradio.com. I'm now joined by Paul Mitchell, Director at Mitchell McDermott, Project Managers and Quantity Surveyors. Paul, thank you for being with us again today. It's been a while since we saw you last in studio.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Good afternoon, Carol. How are you?
Good, thank you, Paul. The world has changed a lot since we sat down in a studio together. First of all, just, I suppose, a really important one. Most people listening in will be very familiar with Mitchell McDermott's latest report that issued. In fact, I remarked to you off air that certainly it's been a while since an industry report has garnered so much media attention, and there was a lot in it. So we might just break that down. But before we get into the report, you might just share an overview of how construction activity is faring.
Yeah, I suppose, last March and through April into May, we had our first construction shutdown, which was extremely difficult. It was the first time that sites had shut down. Construction had to reorganize itself. And I think the contractors and the CIF did a very good job of working out their standard operating procedures, bringing health and safety onto sites and dealing really well with it. It was very difficult in terms of construction claims, productivity, missed deadlines, kind of legal damages, and that front. And to be honest, we were only getting towards the end of those negotiations, which are tense for all because everybody has lost money. And then obviously construction didn't get shut down in the second national lockdown. And we were surprised to an extent, albeit everyone was surprised about the increase in cases, to get locked down again. And I think you can see now that there's extreme frustration with the length of time that this has gone on. And the fact that the minister with the Taoiseach actually on the 31st of January said when cases drop below 1,000, construction would reopen. That was the first and last time we heard that. And construction didn't reopen. And now what people are finding is with part of the industry, a third of the industry or so open, major projects, Grange Gorman's open, healthcare projects, exporters, manufacturing, and essential, they're all deemed essential projects. Social housing falls under the same banner. The dichotomy for contractors is that they have to pay their people to hold on to them. So the contractors that have contracts managers and programmers and all these people, if they don't pay them fully, they will leave to a contractor potentially that has an open site. Because people are still scarce. And then we've had a lot of people not come back from mainland European countries due to the lockdown. So I think just in the last week, I think the patience is wearing really thin. And the lack of engagement with the construction industry is giving rise to great frustration because people are saying, well, there haven't been that many outbreaks. People have been separated. We're talking about 60,000 people when I think today we've had 320,000 children return to school as part of the first phase, and all of the people that will be, traveling with those children to school. And they're saying, for the sake of the 60,000, is it really going to have an effect? Because the history to date has been that there haven't been that many cases on site, so that they have been well behaved, and they pumped all this money in and all this training, and you had to do a separate test and you had to have a card and so on to get to site. And that's all been seen as kind of not a waste, but there's been a lack of recognition for the amount of effort put in, I think. So I think... Yeah. Frustration is definitely bubbling over right as we speak.
Yeah, Paul, I would absolutely second that from our own clients and the people we're speaking to. But in what you've mentioned there's a couple of things to unpack because absolutely this figure, this hope that we got that construction sites would reopen when cases got below 1,000, and within a week of that being said, I think cases got one day to 830, and then the next day was over 1,000. And there didn't seem to be any clarity, no shining light to actually show what was likely to happen. So I agree in terms of frustration. And actually, I think the Construction Industry Federation and other industry lobby groups have actually done a really good job in speaking out in maybe calling out some of the less logical alliances. So, for example, it's confusing to me why construction and schools were lumped in together over the past few months. So as in, if schools were being shut down, construction sites would be shut down. And I didn't understand that. But and actually I genuinely didn't think it was helpful. So to see the schools go back and construction sites not go back, that just seems like the reverse order in terms of safety and the people we need to be protecting. And, look, I certainly have not been critical about any of the public health aspects here, because I think it's an incredibly challenging job. I wouldn't like to be in the position of any of our leaders over the past year or in the coming year, so I think that they've done a tremendous job. And certainly it wouldn't be my place to question public health decisions. Mm-hmm. But I cannot reconcile how schools going back, teachers not vaccinated, would be a safer environment than construction sites when they have shown to be a lower degree of infection. Yeah. It just doesn't seem logical.
Yeah, it's the numbers really, because you talk about the number of children. My own daughter went back to school today, but you talk about the number of people, and then, an article in the paper at the weekend talked about, the fact that you've got the builders, if you want, sitting at home. Well, they're not the type of people to sit at home either. And therefore, are you just giving rise to the potential for kind of workers to be out doing jobs in other people's houses, and are these people on the move anyway? And I think it's not good from just a national point of view. And I think we have to keep in mind the infection, and we have to keep in mind the numbers and the seriousness of it, but that's not lost on people, and hence all the effort and so on. But then no other construction industry is shut down. So then outside people, and we rely a lot on foreign direct investment and investment here to produce housing. We've talked a lot about that over the last few weeks. But if they're saying, well, they don't care about the construction industry, or, we'll say one thing and then we just won't communicate with you for a few weeks and hopefully you'll have forgotten about it. Like, people are sitting at home and they're being funded by contractors. We know that it's a very tight industry with small subcontractors, and it's just a patchwork quilt of small subcontractors. But for no information or no communication to have happened, I think that's the very frustrating thing. And we can understand an effort and we can understand everything, but I think the mixed messages and the lack of attention given to it, or the balance. I think that's probably what's missing, is that balance. And with the schools, 320,000 plus travellers, or drivers, people bringing the children to school maybe, or the buses, or just, there is that anyway, to say then that the 60,000 people that play a critical role in delivering housing have to sit at home. It is hard for people who are footing a bill every day to watch that and to have no communication on the issue. So I think, again, the frustration is there.
Yeah. Paul, the last day we spoke with you, we had touched on, and you touched on it in the opening moments of this interview about construction claims. And really, the last time we spoke, it was much too early to say how matters like that would resolve themselves. And I assume that for a lot of sites, it's still too early to say. But I mean, in terms of what you're seeing at the moment, how is that working out? Because I think you very rightly pointed out, everybody's lost money here.
I think for a lot of cases, I would say 80 or 90% of the cases, the claims have been agreed, or a way forward has been agreed. New contracts have been approached in a different way that anticipate pandemic clauses, liquidated amounts for if the site stops again, what if we have a new variant or some other pandemic. So that's very firmly written into construction contracts, and that risk is now identified. So I think contractors and clients alike saw that, look, we have to work our way through this. There is no point in anybody standing in ceremony, because projects have to get done. And we had a lot of student projects that had to be completed, hotels that, were on track to open and so on. And a lot of those projects did get to their finish line, and claims are there. We also have a plethora of other projects where we've agreed the claim situation and the contract situation, which is very, very difficult. And now we're back to doing exactly the same thing, but this time round, there's no money left in the kitty. A lot of these projects were wrung dry from the first negotiation. Nobody anticipated having to pay this money. The revenue is down or delayed, and the contractors have also, everybody's had cost. And I think that's going to be the very difficult piece about this. And I think it's going to take a lot longer to sort out. I think it's going to, like, the pricing from contractors in the marketplace is definitely going to be in flux, because there's supply-demand imbalances in lots of different areas. We've had student and hotel projects slow. We've got, let's say, uncertainty about the office market. We've got data centers and flying ahead, and residential that there's still, a demand for. We've got funds that still want to put their money into Irish construction projects. But then if we go below the surface, we'll then see that between Brexit and COVID, we've had this disruption to all the supply chains. So we've got this, tariffs and price increases, which caught a lot of people by surprise. You wouldn't think it, but a lot of subcontractors were surprised or didn't understand that if they were getting a product from mainland Europe and it was repackaged or badged or there was something done to it in the UK before it came here, that suddenly you had a tariff applied. So then everyone's kind of trying to grapple with getting around the UK land bridge, getting things direct, and in some cases actually having your site shut wasn't a bad thing from that point of view as people tried to figure that out. But there's been a range of things, like transport costs gone up 300%. I couldn't understand this for the first. I said, why have transport gone up so much? And because the containers ended up in the wrong continent, and certain shipping lines were open, but other shipping lines were closed. Containers ended up in the wrong continent and ended up in a supply-demand imbalance. And then you read another headline and it says timber has gone up 10%. Okay, why has timber gone up 10%? Because Ireland have fallen behind on their licenses for felling in forests. And you kind of go, okay, so that's a completely different thing. And then you see companies like, it's already public knowledge from the company, but Kingspan say we can't support certain contracts because our input prices have gone up 65% for certain metal because of the way China now procure and manufacture steel. And you kind of go, there's a lot of different challenges going on at the one time when you really want things to just be settled.
No, sorry, but I suppose then I'm thinking of contractors who are sitting here that have tender bids in front of them and deadlines looming. How is all of these different factors, how is that going to change contracts going forward? What is the advice that you're giving, say, to contractors right now?
Well, I suppose we're always across the table from contractors because we just act for clients. So we say to the contractors, give us your best price, please. Apart from being glib about it, I think the impact of this is just a lot of uncertainty. And I think it's very, very difficult for contractors who want work, who need work, where there's, the pipeline has been, that tap has been really slowed. So when the contractors come back and they're finishing their projects that are on site, but they really want to get new work. But when we've got all this uncertainty around, it's very difficult for them because in contracts, they buy out that inflation. They buy out that inflation for the next 12 or 18 or 24 months, depending on how long the contract is. But they then have to go back to back and sell that risk down to their subcontractors and so on. So it's really the kind of smaller subcontractors, and that's why I think we have to watch the market quite carefully as we reopen as to what happens with the supply chain. Because ultimately, it's the person at the end of the queue that is really kind of saddled with a lot of the risk. And when they can't handle the risk, there is the potential for them to fall over. Now, we're not seeing that, but the more the industry stays closed and have to deal with risk on both sides of the fence, it has to be a case that, there will be repercussions from that over the next few months.
Yeah, you're painting quite an alarming picture there, Paul. There are so many negative factors in play here. And, just I suppose to jump back to the report that I mentioned there at the start, and I recommend that the report makes for interesting reading. So I absolutely recommend people go to your website and get the details from there, Mitchell McDermott. You touched on some of the sectors that are faring well in terms of data centers. And I mean, some of the stats around hotel rooms would have surprised people. But I think one of the big shock stories that came out of your report was around the residential side of things and the number of units that have been delayed or are currently delayed as a result of judicial reviews. The process to the SHD process has really been derailed. Can you maybe briefly share what's been happening in that sector?
Yeah, so I suppose we carried out an analysis on this so-called fast track planning, which is the strategic housing development, and that was been in play for about 3.5 years, and that's grant permission for 65,000 units over that time. Now, on board Planola, so this is where you consult with the local authority and then you get permission to go straight to on board Planola. And there's been some controversy around that in terms of people's right to object. But it was due to the amount of objections they were getting and delaying schemes that was taken up to 100 weeks to get planning. As opposed to what's meant to be 40 weeks under the SHD or fast track. But even going down the fast track route on board Planola, we're refusing 1 in every 5 permissions. Okay, and that's the board doing its job, that buildings and design that aren't up to scratch get refused. I certainly have no issue with that. But in 2020, after that 1 in 5, 20%, 30% of the 2020 planning permissions are either quashed or stalled due to this so-called judicial review process. And, if you go back maybe 5 years ago and you ask someone what JR was or judicial review, they'd say, I think it's something to do with the courts, but, you wouldn't have related it to planning. But I think what people have found is that, well, I'm not happy with on board Planola, so I'm going to take a legal review and I'm going to go to the courts and basically go to the courts and say, I think that on board Planola have erred in their permission. And that's a very legal procedure. And I think what we found was that some permissions had been quashed by the board because of sometimes relatively minor issues. So there might have been the wrong draft of a report included, incorrect references, not enough dimensions on a drawing. Now, and in some of those cases, you take it, the permission gets quashed, snakes and ladders right down to the bottom of the board again. And it takes 4 months to climb up that ladder if you don't have to change anything. So you change the date on the report, you correct the reference, or you add the dimensions, you climb back up your ladder again, and then you submit the planning and they go, yes, you have permission. So all that is delay and cost, right? Now, we're not taken away at all from the fact that if there is something material, someone has missed an environmental issue, or there is some particular thing there, then fine, okay, if the board have made a mistake. It's really the frivolous nature of the GR process, and it's really an abusive process, really. And it's a very low bar in order to go to court. So what we said there was that, there should be a review. And I understand that the Minister for Housing is actually looking at this in terms of carrying out a review to say, well, is the process too easy to take? Is it too easy to abuse? The process should still be open for everybody. Cost shouldn't be used as a barrier because it should be just about the facts of the matter themselves. But when we did the analysis, to be honest, it shocked us because we were hearing about it more and more. And even in our projects now, on the residential projects, so Mitchell McDermott are involved in 14,000 units today, apartments, that is, not housing, in addition to that. And in the projects where we're project managers, we have to now include an 8-week period after we get planning permission where we all sit and do nothing. And we wait until there has been no objection or no judicial review taken, and then we move on. So you've kind of got that 8 weeks introduced for all projects now, where you can't get your contractor going or you can't enter into detailed design or your contract stage. And you have to sit and wait. And then if you do get judicial review and your permission is quashed, that's a minimum of 4 months. But it's probably, if there's any element of redesign to be done, it's a minimum of 6 months. And then if it is anything more than that, then obviously it's that time is on top of that again. So
do we, sorry to cut across there, Paul, but do we know, in terms of, you're detailing huge delays, we can almost make assumptions about the huge cost that would go along with that, not just the cost of delay, but also the cost of redoing the application. Do we have an idea of the line whereby these costs and delays push a project into the territory where it's just no longer viable?
But we've just, wearing my other hat, we've just issued the Society of Chartered Surveyors report on apartments, where we look at exactly that viability issues on apartments. And we know that we still have issues with viability on build to sell schemes for apartments, let's say. And the only people that are getting us out of jail are people that are taking a long-term view on apartments, like pension funds and so on, that are buying them. And we still see that those metrics are very narrow in terms of making a scheme work. And if you take an example here of 100 units, and if you take the holding costs for the site for a year, let's just say, it is anywhere, in the order of $500,000 for a scheme of 100 units, right? So that's $5,000 per unit if you were delayed for a year, plus your redesign costs, for your team, plus legal fees, etc., etc. So all this is doing is delaying a scheme which has been granted planning, adding cost to it. And in that situation, that cost is getting added on to the ultimate punter who's trying to rent or trying to buy a unit. So this process that's happening is only affecting the people. Like, affordability is still our biggest issue in residential accommodation. And a lot of people, a lot of parties, a lot of opposition parties talking about affordability, but at the same time, saying that JR process, there's nothing wrong with that because it's stopping big bad developers delivering us homes.
It's very frustrating, Paul. And, it's the kind of thing that actually I could talk to you about all day, and I would love to talk to you about it all day, but I don't think that we'd even get close to solving the issue. But it's definitely something that we've touched on before. We're likely to return to. But in the meantime, that report has put a lot of things in very sharp context for not just for us, but as you say, for for hopefully policymakers as well. So it would be good to see some change coming out of that. For now, that's all we've time for. Thank you so much for being with us today. That was Paul Mitchell, Director at Mitchell McDermott, Project Managers and Quantity Surveyors. We need to take another quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Talon. You can contact us on Twitter at iProperty Radio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Now, I'm now delighted to be joined across the water from the US, Michael Beckerman, CEO of CREtech. Michael, you're very welcome. I've been a long time admirer of your work, and I'm so delighted you're in a position to join us today.
Carol, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm a fan of your work as well, and happy to spend a few minutes with you today.
Well, thank you. Now, I'm hoping that our audience will be well familiar with your work because we share it often through PropTech Ireland. One of the things we're really keen to do is share the experiences and the learnings from industries that are a little more developed than ours when it comes to not just PropTech and tech for commercial real estate, but also a very exciting initiative that you're working on, which is around climate and sustainability. And that's a really big focus for today. But maybe for people who aren't familiar, you might just give a little bit of background to yourself and CREtech.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So we've been on a mission at CREtech for, say, the last 8 years or so about helping the real estate industry as a whole embrace technology and innovation. It's an industry that obviously that you know incredibly well that historically has not made the investments, both in terms of dollars and people and tools and applications in technology and innovation, simply because they never really had to. The industry worked incredibly well for generations. But so we set out to build this community globally. And thanks to friends like you and your colleagues, it's not just the US, but it's a global audience approaching probably close to 100,000 professionals. So, our main business has been physical conferences, obviously now virtual conferences. We also have a streaming platform called CREtech Plus, where we take a lot of our video content and stream that in a format very similar, obviously, to a Netflix type of product. So it's the community consists of venture, it consists of startups, and it consists of the end users, which will be the corporates, the landlords, brokerages, asset managers, construction companies, and what have you. So it's a pretty big audience. And pre-COVID, I would tell you that the amount of money coming into the ecosystem was extraordinary. Every year it was seemingly doubling and tripling into the multiple billions. The number of startups on the scene what was extraordinary, 7,000 at last count, focused on this sector, but adoption was still always slow, right? COVID was an extraordinary accelerant for the wrong reasons, of course, of technology in all industries. And we saw it obviously in real estate. So now we're finally starting to see some adoption on the real estate tech side of things.
That's really positive to hear. But why, in your opinion, was the built environment seemingly immune to digital transformation for decades?
Yeah, right, Carol. It's, those that come into the industry and don't have the experience say that you have, what they'll say is, oh, it's archaic or it's old fashioned or it's slow to adopt change. That's not the case. The industry worked very well as for generations. It just, the architects had a role, and the financing aspect of the industry had a role, construction, leasing, marketing, things just worked the way they worked. So, and the industry was thriving, so there was no real external impetus to try and get the industry to embrace technology. In most other industries, there is, right? So in retail, it was e-commerce. It kind of forced, the retail industry to adopt to technology and change. In finance, it was a lot of the day traders that forced the big banks to try and adopt to technology. And in real estate, sadly, it was COVID. So now we're at the point where they're also working from home largely, or they're having to bring people back into their spaces in a healthier and safer way. They're having to transact where not everybody's in the office. And what they're learning is they're getting better as a result of all these investments that they're making. The core challenge, though, still remains, Carol, that there's not an infrastructure in place for real estate companies to vet, invest, and adopt technology. They don't have the people, they don't have the processes. So that's where we're still a little bit behind. And also, as my friend Steve Weichel at MIT calls it, the fracking of real estate technology. There's just simply too many individual siloed solutions. So it makes it hard for the real estate industry to adopt all of these individual solutions when they don't even have the resources to do so. That's why we're starting to see more of end-to-end solutions that are being built by the technology companies. And those are the ones that are really starting to scale.
I absolutely agree with you in terms of this siloed and quite disjointed rollout of innovation. You know, we see it at a kind of a micro level within smart buildings, and we see it at a macro level kind of within smart cities. But for your own business and your own team at CREtech, but you're an events business, so actually this was probably the time where you had to practice what you preach. And I'm asking this question kind of twofold, because one, I'm genuinely curious to see how you were able to do it together with your own team, but also you're actually one of the resources that opens up these silos of innovation to people. So actually without that platform, where are people getting the information? So I mean, how have the last 12 months been for you and your team?
Well, my beard used to be all dark and black, and what have you. Now you could tell what the impact has been. So that's a great question, Carol. So with us, we always had the core premise and the strategy of let CREtech be a place where the real estate industry can go to discover the best technology solutions, strategies, and that never changed. What we had to adapt to was, well, they weren't going to go to a place to do it. So perhaps they'll go online and do it. Now, in the beginning of the pandemic, and not to get too much into the weeds on my own business or industry, it was new, it was unique, it was cool. It felt interesting to watch a couple-day conference online. And then just like everybody else, the Zoom fatigue just set in. So it wasn't, and the great thing about being a virtual conference company is you get all the data. So now we have all this data that says what people are watching, when, for how long, and we can analyze it. And one of the things that we found was there's too much online content. So we then decided we're going to make all of our conferences free. We'll attract the best audience we possibly can, and then we'll move it to a streaming product where people can digest it on their own. And it's made our company better, honestly, as a result. So our virtual conferences are still good. They're growing. We got great talent, great speakers that we're really known for. And we're just distributing it in different ways. And I do think that we'll be back confident in the physical sense. We'll have something planned in Europe at the end of this year, as well as New York. So we'll come back.
And I'm delighted to hear that. But I'm fascinated just in relation to the data about what this industry is watching, what topics were of interest. Tell me, what most surprised you when you looked at it?
Well, a couple things. We did an event recently where we're doing these matchmaking events online, and there's no content. It's just, creating the huge audience that CREtech has and delivering sort of just this matchmaking platform for a day. And it's been extraordinary. And the feedback is incredible. So one of the things that we learned is people want to connect, but they want like-minded, smart connections that are valuable to them in whatever they're selling, promoting, learning, trying to digest. So that works. There's a great demand for just pure networking online, other than, in a non, other than LinkedIn, obviously, but like this. Number two is, what they're looking for is actionable ideas and solutions where they can see examples of what's been done effectively. So what they want, which is what we've always done at CREtech, is try and put people on stage that can show specific examples where technology worked, what the ROI was, and how it benefited their company as a result. So time and time again, less theory, less grandiose ideas, more practical, real world case studies, examples. That's what the audience is looking for. How?
Yeah. Okay. I think that from my point of view, certainly in the European approach has never been one to appreciate failure. We aren't good at learning from failure. And in fact, we often quote maybe the US market and say, okay, these guys understand the value of failure. This is something, certainly from an Irish approach and very much an English approach, it would have been considered failure as something that's almost contagious, so you don't talk about it. That's really changed over the past decade since the crash and subsequent recovery. Now it's kind of a badge of honor. So we're definitely getting better around that. But there's a little bit of tokenism still. So actually, because, even though, yes, there's been innovation across the built environment for a long time, we're seeing a change just because of technology, both as an enabler and a driver. Are we talking about the failures enough so that people can have confidence in it?
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful assessment. And I agree with you. And listen, you're talking to somebody that has probably set a record for the most number of failures in his life. And everything I do, I learn from failure. So I embrace it. And I think it's a wonderful thing. Not all the time, but I'm totally comfortable with telling people and showing people this worked, this didn't work. This is what I'm working on. Just like I told you. I mean, I'm not here to promote. I want to offer some insights into help other people. This worked, this didn't, and this is what we're doing about it. In the world of technology, I know you're right. What the best speakers, and again, we're not a pay-to-play platform in that sense, that if you see somebody speaking and they're an owner, landlord, construction company, they've been really, we've gone through a great process at CREtech of understanding what they're going to talk about and to make sure this is not just a place to promote. This is a place to teach and learn and set by example. Now, that's the wonderful thing I love about our industry, the one that you and I share, is it's incredibly collaborative. Like everybody I find, for the most part, just wants to help everybody else out. It's not as competitive as it is, say, in other industries. So we'll put people on stage and we'll sit there and say, we tried this, it didn't work. We tried this and it worked and we accelerated it. And those are the best speakers. And those are the ones that we try and find. And our audience, I mean, I've had speakers that you'll find at CREtech that are from the landlord side that challenge the startups and say, this is why I can't adopt your technology. This is what you're not hearing. This is what you're not paying attention to, understanding my needs. And those are the best speakers. And we feature a lot of that type of style.
Yeah, I think the industry needs to it does come down to case studies, but case studies, that doesn't mean handpicked to only show the successes. We need to know what doesn't work so that we understand what's been tried, and it gives us a deeper understanding as to maybe what may work, and we can break that down. So I think that's so important. And actually, I don't want to jump topics abruptly, but I'm very aware of time, and I'm also aware that one of the really big reasons why I reached out to you to do this interview is around an initiative that you have started, CREtech Climate. And I think it's really important because at the moment I mentioned to you that the construction industry in Ireland, all non-essential sites have been shut down since the 8th of January. It's really worrying. The industry is increasingly frustrated. And, we're doing this off the back of a housing crisis, so there are a number of frustrations happening. And one of the concerns that we have just by stepping back from the chaos and taking a bigger look is that, one of the things that happened is that in the COVID crisis, we almost lost sight of what was happening in terms of Brexit, which is continuing to have a massive impact on the industry in Ireland. And to a greater extent, we're seeing this happen in terms of sustainability initiatives, that there's an issue with us looking too closely and staying too close to the center of the chaos, that we're not looking at the bigger picture anymore. So from our point of view on the show here, we really want to keep sustainability to the fore of our conversations despite the ongoing chaos. And from that point of view, I was looking at some interviews that you've done recently and around the launch of CREtech Climate. I think it's really interesting. I think it's something that in Ireland we can really stand to learn from. So you might just take us through that.
Well, on this one, Carol, I am by nature a very optimistic person. I don't mind. I've always in my whole career gravitated towards what was hard and what was challenging and what was difficult. There's just something about the way that I'm wired that I go where there's going to be a significant challenge for me in my own sort of professional development, as well as, attracting others to try and solve big problems. Obviously, this is the biggest challenge, not just for me, for all of us, climate change, right? And I am absolutely without any reservation that climate change is real, and the threat to our species is significant. So I'm doing this not because I think it's a great PR opportunity, or it's a hot, cool, box to check and say, oh, now we're pushing into this because this is a fad. I'm doing it with a great sense of fear. I'm scared for our humanity, for my children's generation and their children. And I'm not very optimistic either that we're going to get this right. But I'm going to give it everything I got. I'm going to put my name on it. I'm going to bring it to my big audience. I'm going to look for people like you to help us. And I think that for the real estate industry to understand now, the compelling argument is that external forces are going to converge on real estate that are going to put such a spotlight on the built world and its negative contribution on climate change, that we're not going to be able to escape the culpability of the fact that 40% of all carbon emissions are emanating from the built world. We can't hide from that. We're kind of flying below the radar screen right now, but most people are still thinking it's energy, it's transportation, it's, et cetera, et cetera. It's the built world. We are incredibly responsible. So we have this opportunity, but we have these impending threats, whether it's government, tenants, residents, people that want to live in these spaces, to take this on now with a great sense of urgency. But I'm also concerned, to be brutally honest with you, because like you said, there's so many other challenges out there, in this kind of COVID environment that are competing for everybody's attention and solutions. So I'm doing all that I can within a wonderful consortium of companies like EY and Savills and Fifth Wall and ULI and RXR and others and Oxford Properties, to really raise this level of awareness and education, but with a great sense of urgency, because as you know well, Carol, we don't have time. So I'm hopeful, but we got a lot of work to do to get our industry to wake up and see it also as an incredible opportunity to really change the world along the way and in the process. So that's what I'm trying to do. And that's why CREtech Climate was formed.
Michael, we want to help you. How can we help? And I don't mean just me as an individual rolling out into organizations, and then rolling further into the industry and keep rolling that wider and wider. But there has to be a starting point. There's the one thing about a journey is that it has to start from wherever you are now, not from what we ought to have been doing a decade ago. So from where we are today, what are the first steps that we need to be taking? What are the basic things that we need to be checking off the list to say, okay, well, now we can start to get into bigger things? It's a very big conversation, and I'm conscious that this is a very short interview, but I want, you talked about kind of the value of actionable ideas. What actionable idea can we give to the industry today?
Well, honestly, I think the first step is just join CREtechClimate.com. Sign up. It's free. It's a daily newsletter. We need people first to get involved, right? That's step one. I could give you a list of extraordinary solutions, technology solutions that are out there that the companies could start to look at, but we need people. We need to build a community, and fast. I don't have 10 years like I built with CREtech to get 100,000 people. I've got to get that now. So the first thing we need to do is mobilize an army of people who care and are passionate about this in all walks of the built world. right? So I don't care what your title is, what your company is, just join this movement. And once we start to build the community, then we could bring into the thought leaders into the conversation. Then we could bring in government. Then we could bring in their technology solutions. There's some great investors in Europe as well, 2150, iProperty, and there's many others that are doing good work. My job is to build the community, galvanize the audience, educate them, and then move them. So I think step one, Carol, honestly, is what you're doing right now is just let's get the word out, sign up, get involved.
Okay, Michael, you have our commitment. We will start that ball rolling just from our own organizational point of view, but also in terms of rolling it out. I think it's massively important. And, it's like all of these things, we need leaders in this space. And sometimes when leaders are needed, they don't always step forward. And I think, we're starting to see some amazing, inspiring leaders, and including yourself and the organization. So it's definitely something that we want to make sure that we support and make sure as many people as possible know about. Michael, I could talk to you all day. I wish we had more time, but I hope we get to do this again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate all your support, all your leadership, and everything that you're doing. You're a great fan of CREtech, but more importantly, for the entire real estate tech ecosystem at large. So thank you for all your hard work. I appreciate it.
Michael, I normally have to pay for such praise. Thank you so much. That's it. That's it from us today on Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iProperty Radio or by emailing hello@ipropertyradio.com. Also, my thanks to Peter Rice on sound and to show producer Katie Talon of Hear Me Roar Media. And just on a personal note, after more than 2 years as our producer, today is Katie's final show as she moves on to Pastures Green. So she's moving on to one of Ireland's leading media groups, and we're not at all bitter about it. We wish her the very best of luck. And so that's it from ourselves. We'll be back at the same time next week. For myself, Carol Talon, and all the team here, stay safe.